And welcome to Think Tank by Adobe, where we'll be digging into what it means to be an experienced business. I'm CHARLENE Lee, founder and principal analyst at Altimeter, and I'll be your moderator for this event. If you're joining us online, I invite you to share your thoughts and leave your comments at the hashtag AdobeTT, and we'll be incorporating your comments into the discussion here in this room. Speaking of this room, we are at this beautiful Frank Gehry designed building called the Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health, and it's a wonderful environment for us to really explore what is possible, because this building is quite impossible in terms of its design. So when we think about design in experience business, what are we talking about? Well, when we think about our customers, they are incredibly fast-moving and hyper-connected, and they are demanding compelling, personalized experiences. And the organizations that can meet those customers wherever they are, whenever they want us to be there for them, are the ones who are going to have a significant competitive advantage. Now, there's some data here that I wanted to share. Gartner found that in 2010, 36% of companies, a little bit over a third, expected to compete mainly on customer experience. In 2010, that number had risen to 89% of businesses. So it's clear experience is a priority for businesses. But how do you create that? What does it mean to actually be an experienced business? Well, what we're going to be doing today is something that started last night. We had dinner together with all these experts here in this room, and we started thinking about what does it mean to actually be that experienced business along three dimensions: design, delivery, and data. I'd like you to meet a few of those people. So with me here today, starting from my left, is Jordan.
Hi, I'm Jordan KRETCHMER. I'm a GM of a couple business units in the marketing cloud at Adobe, working on software that helps our customers create better experiences for their consumers.
Hi, I'm NANDINI NAYAK. I'm Managing Director and Design Strategy Leader for Fjord, which is Accenture's design consultancy.
I'm Steve Cook, Contributing Editor for CMO.com by Adobe. I'm a former CMO at Samsung, and I work with VCs around the world.
I'm Ethan IMBODEN, and I'm VP of Design and Head of Venture Design at Frog, which is a global design and strategy firm.
I'm RANA June. I'm the CEO of Lightwave, which is an emotion technology company.
Hello, I'm Teresa Lamontagne. I'm Head of Digital Marketing for Verizon.
Hi, I'm Daniel Newman. I am the Principal Analyst at Futurum Research and the CEO of BroadSuite Media Group.
And I'm SCHNEIDER. I'm the Senior Vice President of Digital for Royal Caribbean Cruises.
Great. And so what we've been doing, the nine of us, over the past morning, and again, starting with dinner last night, was really digging into what it means to be an experienced business. And what we're going to do is spend time looking at it again from these three dimensions of design, delivery, and data. Each team will be taking each of their findings around these brainstorms, pulling them together into some provocative questions and statements. It would take about 25, 30 minutes for each of those discussions, dig deep into them, and then move on to the next area. And the goal here is to understand, what does it mean? What does it take to become that experienced business? So let's get started. We're going to start with the design team first of all. So, Nan, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Charlene. So our statement, as Ethan and Steve got together, is every business is an experience business. Earlier, people used to think that only companies like Disney or a cruise line was an experience business because their product was an experience. But in the multi-channel, multi-touchpoint world we live in, I think products are not what customers are buying anymore. They're buying experiences, and a product is an element of that experience. So if experiences are what people are buying, and experiences are what people value, then ultimately every business has to think about the multi-channel nature in which it actually interacts with customers. So one element of that is as technology and data become part of the delivery of those experiences, having an empathic connection, having an ethical approach to how you deliver those experiences becomes critical to that business, right? So from that perspective, what we were thinking is that we really need to get even technology businesses and product businesses to begin to consider that they are in an experience business. Do you want to add something to that, Ethan?
Yes, certainly. I think what we're looking at is people don't buy products, they buy experiences inherently, and that runs across all sorts of businesses. And those experiences take many forms, and that can surprise the companies that are in these businesses today. So an experience that I'm engaged in right now is a BMW experience. But it's not an experience that I think they anticipated, which is I'm selling a very old BMW. But that experience has been an amazing experience for me because the person I'm selling it to is such an enthusiast that he has me thinking again that the next car I need to buy will also be a BMW. So how do you begin to look at that full scope and that full gamut? When we talk about design and its role in these experience businesses, we see that design can be a source of the experiences as a very integrative and collaborative practice inherently. If you continue to ladder that up and these experiences become the key element of the business, implications start to emerge like, well, if ultimately what we're selling is an experience and a successful experience sells itself, then what is the role of a marketer in the future of an experience business? Do we need them? If we don't have a marketer, and inherently the success of the business hinges on the experience, then does that experience responsibility need to lie with the CEO? Does the CXO obviate the need for a CMO in a successful case and then become in that top position as the CEO? And where does the designer sit in that new organizational structure?
Yeah, so essentially we're saying that if experiences don't market themselves, then there's something wrong with how the experiences are being delivered. So marketing actually is a patch on something that you're not doing well. So that's a provocative statement to make, right? So marketing's role may become that of the experience. But then how does technology play a role in this, right? So if organizations have to become empathetic and ethical at the same time and scale their experiences across global markets, then you need to have technology play a role in actually building that empathy, building that responsibility for ethical use of data and technology. So we don't think that scaling of empathy is easy, and that's why most companies tend to focus on technology and data and hope that that delivers great experiences. But we know that without that empathetic understanding of customer needs and that connection to ethical use, we cannot scale customer experiences in the way customers want them to be delivered. So the challenge for companies, technology companies, is how do you deliver that next platform that enables you to drive or enable empathy and ethical use of data through organizations which are experience businesses.
Just to put a capstone on what Ethan and NANDINI said, at the end of the day, the sum of the experiences is indeed the product. Product's always important. A BMW, it's got to be a great car, but the experiences that happen along the journey while you have the ownership, while you're getting it serviced, and in this case, while you're selling it, those all add up, and that needs to be a very thoughtful process across all functions in the organization and every touch point, online and offline, and this is true for any business today that wants to survive.
All right, thank you for that. And just a reminder for the people who are joining us online, please add your comments again at Adobe, the hashtag AdobeTT, and want to open it up for discussions. Anybody have any comments to kick that off?
One of the things that was interesting that we talked about earlier today was around the misconception that design has to do with what's on the screen. And I thought that was a really interesting topic because it's no longer just about what I see and look at, but it's everything I could interact with. It's walking in and my house doing something as a result of my presence, or talking to Alexa to get some information about a book report that I'm writing. And I thought that was an interesting notion to dig in on if we can, because it's no longer just about designing interfaces.
To add to that, I mean, look, at the end of the day, we're selling to people. We're people, they're people. We are sensorial beings. So, for all types of product categories, I would imagine on Caribbean cruise lines, you've got somebody thinking about visual sensations, auditory sensations, olfactory sensations, and certainly with all the delicious food on the ships, taste sensations. We have to appeal to and think about design thinking across all senses. That makes sense at different touch points, and that's more important in some categories other than others. Think about fashion, think about health and beauty aids, right? Much more important than buying software, of course. And you've got to appeal to that. You have to understand that.
across all touch points, right? How those touch points work together, you have to design that. You have to think about that. I loved your comment on empathy, right? You've got to have empathy for the consumer feeling at each of those touch points as well.
Yeah. So I think in the next generation of experiences, you're right, it's not going to be screen interfaces. It could be delivered through audio or through your watch, or it could be in your home through a voice interface. So even B2B companies have to consider that they're not going to be delivering a portal as the main experience point, and it has to go across experiences as well. And design thinking as a practice, as designers use, is going to become the pervasive language through which cross-functional teams connect with each other. So we were talking about how design thinking becomes necessary for every team to understand and use. But design thinking by itself does not create great experiences, right? So I think it's important to understand that while design thinking is a practice, we really need to make sure that we are integrated across functional areas to deliver these experiences.
I want to go to your pretty evocative statement that design thinking isn't something that designers do, but the CEO is responsible for this. In fact, the chief executive officer becomes a chief experience officer, I guess,
That's
in some
correct.
ways. Anyone want to talk about that?
Well, actually, you said something that I was curious about. So where do you think the role of design, a designer, in that traditional sense, organizationally, where do they fall? Because if the product is the experience, how does that affect the way that we think about organizations?
I think design choreographs experiences.
Correct.
And then also obviously gets very involved in the implementation of them as well. I don't know that we landed on exactly the right if the CMO goes away, the CXO becomes more important, and eventually the CXO role is really a role of the CEO. I think we're tempted to say that the design function is an operational function. It is fundamental to the functioning of the organization and its success in business. And maybe COO, CFO are no longer side by side, but COO is really that operational piece of conceiving, orchestrating those experiences, which are the fundamental essence of the business, are right there alongside the CEO.
Lana, to your question, I mean, the answer is going to be different in every organization, but we all definitely agree that marketing as a phrase really it's an outdated phrase, outdated concept. It's from 90 years of push marketing. I don't use marketing anymore. I don't use advertising anymore. They're old terms and they force you to think a certain way. One thing we definitely talked about was that it's very important that you have cross-functional design thinking. Every organization and every function really needs to learn this intimately and use it and collectively create that experience. It can't be done in silos anymore. The consumer doesn't live in silos.
But in your question and in your statement, if everybody is an experience company, that inherently means the CEO or your C-suite has to buy into your company being an experience company.
Yes.
And not every company's there yet.
Yeah, most companies still think of themselves as product companies,
Yep.
and then try to layer on what they believe is experience, which is, in the marketing sense, put marketing messages or value propositions that they believe will resonate with a specific target audience versus a different target audience, without changing essentially what that product does or is. So what we are suggesting is that true experience design is where you are able to modify the core product itself to resonate with the appropriate person, and that itself then is personalized. The experience is valued by the customer, so you don't really need to market or target market to them. So it's a fundamentally different approach to how experiences are designed.
In the beginning, you had some remarks about almost 90% of businesses becoming experience businesses, competing on experiences. And you made some commentary about the marketing going away because experiences will sell themselves. I think there's probably a number of marketers probably watching this because Adobe caters to a lot of marketers. And while I do agree automation, AI will change marketing, I also think it's a mistake for us to think that marketing will go away. And it's an opportunity for brands to actually accelerate their marketing, because if 90% of companies are now competing on experiences, there's going to be a responsibility of someone in the organization to continue to create the awareness, because even if your great experience does sell itself, how do I know about your experience? My awareness, my state of awareness of an experience that I may enjoy is going to have to be delivered to me, whether manually through a marketer or through some sort of AI or computing that lands it in front of me, so I take the time to get involved or engaged with that company.
Or how to differentiate too. You have to differentiate the experiences that are ultimately created. So that differentiation will be important.
I agree with you. I think actually that while it's changing, I think it's elevating the role of marketing. So if we think about everything being experienced, the people that have spent their careers focused on what that consumer experience is and how do we curate that experience and improve that experience for the consumers and tailor it for them, it is the marketing departments. And I think in a lot of organizations, marketing has historically taken a back seat to maybe product. And so I actually think that's sort of shifting in a positive way with some of these changes.
Yeah, we've talked about whether marketing should become the new CX, customer experience organization. And there's, whether it's the CEO's office or the CMO's office that takes charge for orchestration of experiences, I think is a debate that we can have. And awareness is definitely a key touch point, but we don't want to call that marketing. So I think what we are saying is let's turn away the old words of marketing and advertising, which is pushing towards customers, get the pull by creating awareness experiences that actually resonate.
Even word of mouth is still marketing.
Yes.
And I guess that's my concern. I know, Charlene, you want to jump in, but I'm really scared that companies will heed this advice and they're going to say, oh, we don't need marketing anymore. We're just going to create an amazing experience and our business is going to grow.
Marketing? I don't agree there. And I think that our strongest marketing, our strongest drive to some form of conversion or engagement is perhaps a referral. Or a repeat based on an experience that an individual had. And I don't consider that to be marketing. I consider that to be experience-driven commitment.
So word of mouth is taking a new shape.
So there are ways in which you can help to promote word of mouth. And I will concede that what we're trying to do is put forward something that's provocative.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad that we succeeded in that. But I think that it is still. To what you're saying, Teresa, we're looking at maybe reformatting marketing and have it being understood as migrating into an experience role alongside, and functioning in that way and through that lens as opposed to in more of a push.
I think it's reframing. So from the C-level down, a lot of times the questions you get are, is my marketing effective? How is my marketing performing? What I think doesn't happen as often from the CEO is asking, is my marketing trying to fill a gap that my product isn't delivering? So is my product delivering for my marketing, not is my marketing delivering for my business? And I think that's a huge, for certain businesses, Charlene brought up the example of United Airlines. And this was a top-down new CEO going from cost-driving, bottom line savings-oriented business to overnight becoming an experience-driven business where the new CEO came in and said, it is about how my products deliver on seamless travel experiences for our customers. And it instantly changed the perspective of that business, and they executed bottoms up as a result of that. I think it's just a cool example of from the top thinking around not just focused, is my marketing acceptable, is my marketing performing, but is my product delivering?
It's not clicks and conversions, it's net promoter score. It's a very different mode of measurement.
Yeah, well, to Dan's point, there were a lot of marketers watching, and one of the questions coming from somebody online watching this is, well, what's the role of a marketer going to be in an experience business?
Right. So I think marketers, by definition, are close to knowing what customers need. They have the measurements of what's happening in the market. I think the way they would interact with product, what is the core product? So I think in a company you have to redefine what the product is. There's no product department and marketing department. I think you have a department that delivers the experience to the customer that includes product. And marketers become a core part of that product generation process.
It reminds me in thinking about design as, to your question, Rana, about what's the role of a designer, what's the role of a marketer in this experience business. You think about IT, right? Their role isn't to run the technology for everyone, it's to enable everyone. And so the designer and the marketer may be the enablers for this experience of business, for design thinking, which at its core is having empathy. Yes. Empathy for that customer, understanding who that person is.
If I can add to that, I think, marketers are not going away. The reason we say don't use the word marketing anymore, it takes you down a direction. What marketers need to, and have the opportunity to lead, because I do agree they should know more about the consumer at every touch point than any other department. They should really be about being an evangelist and an advocate and an enabler and a connector across the organization and through the entire value chain to enable human-to-human relationships between a business, a brand, and people. That's the role. Word of mouth marketing certainly has, I mean, it's the oldest tool in the book, right? It still has a place. Social media has scaled that. So what other tools are there? And the experience is the layer that's empathetically developed that marketers should be figuring out. How do we do it?
So couldn't you make a flip provocative statement to actually say every person in an organization becomes a marketer as opposed to marketing going away? Because you look at customer service as a marketing tool, you look at operations as a marketing tool, you look at every single touch point, right? Frictionless is something we talked a lot about. Maybe the words changed. Like I said, change management became digital transformation because marketers needed something new to sell. And so we're absolutely just flipping it on its head right now. Is every experience point is the marketing of a company.
Yes.
And every person within that company is a marketer.
Absolutely.
The reason the word is, changing the words is important is if you look at traditional marketing, what they measure is the success of a marketing campaign or the success of a marketing effort rather than the core experience itself. So if you remove the word marketing and experience becomes the product, then things like empathy, did you not just think about whether the product uptook, but that you created empathy or relationship, then the measures of that experience and how you instrument those measures becomes important. So the brand affinity and how you're building memorable experiences becomes a key metric rather than whether your campaign worked and did you get...
That's a reflection of goal alignment among your leadership team to say,
exactly.
We value experiences, we value experience development and great experiences, and so your change is no longer the ROI of that campaign, but the impact it had on the overall customer experience.
That's correct. That's correct. I think that's why we were provocative in saying marketing goes away, because with that comes a whole set of processes and behaviors that we believe to create a true experience business needs to be fundamentally modified.
It's risky though. One last thought is that I don't know the exact stat, so I'll make one up, but about 90% right of businesses are small. And so we talk, every example of great experience business is some gigantic company that has endless amounts of money to spend on marketing and creating experiences. Most companies are really, really small. So I just think the shift we have to be thoughtful about that shift, because some companies don't have marketing departments, they don't have lots of people. They do market off their experience, but they do need to create awareness still. And a Facebook ad, for instance, might be how they create awareness just because they have a great experience, but only people within 5 minutes of the restaurant or the dry cleaner, whatever they are, can find them.
I think a small business can be an experience business, and technology is an option, but it's not a requirement for accomplishing this. And I think that's already the case. Going to your to the hairdresser that you see, maybe not you, the hairdresser that I see. Leveraging earlier conversation, that didn't come out of nowhere, folks. I wasn't being mean. Going to see the hairstylist, the local bakery or shop that you frequent. These are experiences, and these are experience businesses that I would argue are doing it right, that we need to learn from and emulate and scale, not the opposite way around. They don't need to struggle to do what we're trying to do with big business, because they, in many cases, are doing it really, really well.
It's interesting you say that. I think
there's actually a paradox if you think about it, just adding to what Ethan said. I think big enterprises can learn a lot by going back and thinking about the old days before there was technology, and how your local baker or your barber shop, how they created an experience, what it smelled like, what it looked like, how they talked to you, how they treated you, and they could see your body language and hear your tone and your words. How do you, in today's world that's tech enabled, how do you pick and assemble the right technology to recreate that that very warm relationship, to me, that's the holy grail of the future. Building that relationship, how you do it, it's going to take a lot of work and the whole organization.
I think it's defining what that relationship should be. I think, particularly when social media first became popular and everybody wanted to have friends and fans and followers, and do I want to be friends with my dry cleaner? Do I have to be an advocate and a fan of my dry cleaner? Maybe I just want a solid delivery experience and an authentic way where things get picked up at time, delivered on time, and my needs are handled. And I think a lot of marketers, sometimes we lose track of the shiny object and forget to say, what's an authentic way for us to connect with our consumers? What's an authentic experience that we want to have with them? And what's an authentic relationship that we want to have with them?
Technology can overcomplicate and get in the way of true interaction.
Right, or you focus marketing on, oh, now we have to do a Facebook ad. Don't ask yourself, why do you have to do, is that the right vehicle to build empathy?
As important as technology is, it's not the place to start.
That dry cleaner would rather have you tell 2 friends than have 500 more fans on their page.
But to the point of, like, can big businesses learn from small businesses? I think it's a good point. If you look at T-Mobile as an example, their new app, they've figured out how to scale the human capital of their business. So instead of picking up the phone and having to sit on hold for 30 minutes waiting for a customer service rep, you can just text on your own time, and a human being at one of their thousands of stores who's sitting on their hands waiting for people to come to the store can actually respond to your support request and see the whole history of your request. And it flipped the whole model on its head. It's not technology, it's not technology for technology's sake. It's not a chat bot. It's actually technology that's providing a more seamless human connection between the brand and the support experience, which used to be very poor.
Yeah, I gave the example, I think earlier in the morning, of a telecommunications company in Europe we worked with, and their main interaction with their customer was the bill. And the bill was, very much product centric. It was giving you all of what you were paying for, and it's the most mundane and task that anybody would want to do, but they swirled it around and say, this is the most important interaction. They come to us every month to look at this thing, let's change it around, and then made it more useful by saying, what are you using? How many minutes, who's talking, how much text? So it became a useful tool to reflect in my life how this service was fitting in, rather than, how much am I charging you for the bill? So that shift itself became a marketing tool for them, and they reduced their call center volumes by becoming more useful, so that there were no more calls about explain to me what the cost of this was. So I think that's the pivot we want to have people make, is to focus on how they're participating in people's lives, rather than, oh, look at my product, how great am I, right?
We just have a few minutes left, and I just want to push on something that I heard earlier, which is around the whole idea of metrics. Because if you're moving from being a product and revenue-driven organization, the CEO focus on driving stockholder value, to an experience business, how do we know that we've actually met certain goals? If it's not going to be around these traditional metrics anymore, how are we going to know that we've achieved being an experience business and are actually delivering great experiences to people?
I would challenge that and say, why do the metrics have to go away? Just because you're focused on your customer experience first and foremost, that doesn't mean you run away from all of your base metrics to understand how your customers are engaging with you. You may add new ones that you're not thinking about today. What is their emotional feel of the brand? What is their emotional feel of the product or the experience? I just don't think you have to run away from data.
And I think at the end of the day, it's this.
Sorry, there's some higher order metrics that are really helpful. If you move and you over-index on referrals, in order to achieve a referral, you have to have sold to somebody effectively. They need to have had a good experience, a good enough experience that they talk to somebody else about it, and they talk to somebody else about it in such a way that that person was moved themselves to purchase. You may not have the sensors in place to detect that that's what happened, and you need to establish that, but you need to begin to look at those sorts of signals which indicate the experience being a success as opposed to a standalone product being sold.
Teresa?
Yeah, I don't think I agree with you about adding metrics. At the end of the day, no one was doing a Facebook page because they wanted fans. They wanted to sell something. They wanted to grow their business. They wanted to meet their bottom line. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can look at it, but I think sometimes people get lost in the metrics. And so we're not growing awareness and consideration for their sake. We as marketing people are looking at it as a lead indicator to the health of the business and what's going to happen in driving shareholder value. So I don't think it's necessarily the need to go away. I think sometimes we get lost in all of the different metrics and forget what it is that we're trying to do at the end of the day, which is to grow business.
Yeah, and that's why I think the orchestration and top-down goals need to be important, right? Going back to your question, but fundamentally you are there to make profit and revenue, but you have to have line of sight in terms of the experience improvements you're making and how they predict and they drive or lead towards the hard metrics that you have. So some of the work we've been doing is to really say, how do even affinity metrics tie to loyalty? And if they tie to loyalty, how does loyalty convert itself into revenue? So ultimately that overall system is required to make it happen.
There are some new metrics that are available, and RANA, this is an opportunity. We can understand very differently. We can measure experiences very differently with the technologies that we have now, and what Lightwave is doing is demonstrating that. And I think that this is coming, and it will scale, but we'll have a very different view into how our experiences are being received and perceived.
Certainly. I mean, this is happening, and we're doing it very qualitatively at the moment, because I love that idea of looking to the small businesses as an example. The reason that you have such a great experience at your local bakery is that when you eat that croissant, you have a smile on your face, and then that's a data point that gets received. It doesn't get processed through big data or anything like that, but somebody goes, I think people like these blueberry muffins. I'm going to keep doing that, or I'm going to adjust this. And in a way, if you think about it in that sense, in the literal and figurative sense. And I actually love what you said too. At the end of the day, it's people, right? And people are driven, as organic, physiological beings. We have responses, and the idea of measuring heart rate is something very simple. Everybody has a Fitbit, and we're using this kind of data in a way that is very one-dimensional, right? You're looking at how many steps have I walked. But if instead you think about, I was in that bakery, I had a bite of that muffin, my heart rate increased, this was a positive experience. That's something very unique, and it's obviously very early days. I don't think anybody has the answer for how that's going to become the core metric in the way that an affinity score is. But it's not far off to say that notion that a new emotion or experience metric could be created.
Teresa on Facebook would actually like to get a little bit deeper into this. Like, what are the processes that organizations are using to be able to measure how experiences are impacting emotion?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we're designing this experience to be impactful and delight us. How do we know?
Yes. So, for example, we have started working on something, and we've called it the Love Index. And the word itself was a little frightening to us. A lot of B2B people say, how can you bring love and business together? But nobody says, I'm loyal to this experience. People say, I love that. Right? That's great. I'm going to tell a few people about it. So I think we are trying to decompose what it means when people say, I love something. What underlies that? And we found 5 factors, and I won't go into them now, but essentially things like fun, things like enabling connectedness with other people, very human things that what we value in each other's relationship become important in product to person relationships. So I think looking at that lens is going to become an important dimension of how you measure experiences.
Or we can put people forward, and people can solve a lot of this for us. And if you don't think you can scale the person to person, just look at Airbnb and what they're accomplishing in community by providing technology that puts people together, as opposed to trying to build all of the rest more artificially with the technology.
Rana, bring us home and bring us
Well, just wanted to say, perhaps, it's true there are many marketers listening and probably wondering what the future will hold. But the nice thing is every experience is different. I think if we are considering that, everyone in this room, our priorities are different, right? So really, in a way, that notion of bringing that artfulness into it is important too. So for instance, maybe the priority for one type of business is different, but the metrics don't have to be universal either. And so maybe in a sense, one of the things that could happen is that you'll have, rather than having this sledgehammer metric that's everybody, you're looking to the click, or you're looking to whatever that metric might be, could be that there's personalized metrics per business based on an emotional underpinning.
Yes.
In an age of big data, maybe what we should be thinking about is big emotion and big experiences.
Yeah, interesting. And with that, we're going to move on to the next section. So let's take a deep breath. All right, let's focus on delivery. So this is my team, but I'm going to let my teammates here talk about it. Jay, Jordan?
Sure. I actually wish data was going first, because a lot of what we talked about was how delivery is sort of the culmination of design and data. And so all the conversations that we had were around, okay, what are the frameworks that companies are using to enable the experience business. And it's everything from the top-down strategy, from the CEO level down, saying, what am I automating? How am I going to scale in the case of Disney? How am I going to scale a really good experience from one park to another? So all of these concepts ended up going kind of circling around this idea that AI is driving automation and personalization in terms of how experiences and content and things are delivered to the end consumer. And so we're starting backwards from where you guys did. So I'm going to toss to Jay in a minute to actually say what our provocative statement is. But that's sort of the approach we were taking. Is it's not just about delivery of a piece of content or personalization of a piece of content. It's about how an organization is set up, structured, process-wise, and enabling themselves with tools to actually deliver an experience to an audience. And the insight that we got to is, one, all of the tools don't exist yet, right? There aren't enough tools for any marketer to utilize in the data or design realms in order to deliver great experiences. It still requires a huge human component of interaction. But I think the biggest thing was that when you look within an organization, there is no single organization that can do this internally, and that leads to the big provocative statement, and I'll toss to Jay.
Yeah, so it's interesting you all started with everybody's an experience company, because one of the things we talked about at length was we don't think everybody's figured out that they're actually an experience company. So in figuring it out that they're an experience company, as they shift towards experience businesses, companies will start to work together to deliver experience chains. We came up with a new word or a phrase, experience chains across businesses and even industries. And whoever moves in first and figures out how to connect businesses across those experience chains will be the ones that frankly win in the experience economy. That was our provocative statement.
Yeah.
So does that make sense? Is that if I'm American Airlines, I can't deliver a seamless experience without some sort of information from Uber to make sure that my passengers are getting home correctly, or Lyft to make sure my passengers are getting home. And so unless there's some Uber business that does everything end to end within a vertical, like travel, then businesses are going to have to start to connect if they truly want to deliver great experiences.
Yeah, I think that's essential to experience businesses and also what we're calling living businesses, right? So every product business should look at its product and break it up into its component parts and figure out whether there is a set of services that, when combined with other services from other brands, creates new value. So one way we are helping businesses think about that is, why don't you atomize, instead of having these monolithic products that you take to market and try to sell the whole thing to someone, think about the 3 or 4 pieces of that product that people value and 3 or 4 other pieces of that other people value. So if you're able to do that in terms of componentization, then integrating across brands becomes easier, so you can build value or new value very quickly. And data becomes an essential element of that, right? So you can share data to create new services.
Kind of raises all of these other questions too around, well, I don't want, if I'm a big brand who has a bunch of credit card data, I don't necessarily want a bunch of other people to get all that data. How do I give scoped access? And what we identified is there's a whole missing layer that nobody is delivering on right now in order to allow for this seamless transfer of scoped access. Like, don't give me all your database. I don't need all your database. I just need to know something specific to help deliver for your customer, American Express, better. And if you give me that one little piece of scoped access, I'm going to deliver a cooler experience.
It'll require more control too for consumers.
Totally.
It requires it.
It's really interesting you say that about American Express, because I think this revolution you're talking about will be led by financial companies, because I think this is where blockchain becomes a really, really critical element of all the data they can conceive and all the connections that can be made through that single technology. We talk a lot about how IoT and sensors are going to lead that way, but having that singular set of technology that can make connections between multiple companies seamlessly, because that's the key word here. We as consumers might want Uber and American Airlines and hotels and Airbnb and everyone to talk to each other, but we don't want to feel it. We don't want to have to opt into it. We don't want to manage it. We just want it to happen.
Well, we spent a lot lot of time talking about how the technology has to be in the background, right? You love it when you open Google Maps and you get a little reminder of where you're going, of what time you're supposed to be there. Those little seamless moments with the technology in the background feel awesome. If it doesn't feel awesome, if you have to manage it, if the technology's in the forefront, and you have to feel like you're slogging through technology, that's where it doesn't feel as good.
But all I was saying is there's really no technology right now that can handle what you're suggesting. So then it becomes cooperation, and then it becomes management, and then it becomes, you know, you have to opt in to all this because we may have opted into one of those companies, but we didn't opt into all of those companies. And then, you know, so how it all happens is going to be, it's only going to be delivered when the technology enables it.
There's certainly an entire layer of missing here, right? And it's not a brand's problem, and it's not, you know, Adobe's problem. There's a just significant technology stack that is a serviceable layer that doesn't exist today that we've just identified as like it's going to be necessary, or we're not going to be able to do, you know, real, true end-to-end experience, which is interesting.
Yeah, the equivalent of this, I think, is how we deal with identity now, where we have Facebook ID, LinkedIn, Twitter, et cetera, to authenticate ourselves. But those are owned by companies, and you trust that they will do this for you. In this experience chain world, you need something around each person's own data. Who are you going to trust? Well, in the end, the best place is yourself. But that requires that you actually can manage your data, you know what is out there, and put a value on it. Some of our discussions earlier today is that you don't even value the data that we have. We're willing to give it away for free shipping or whatever it is that Google is offering us or Uber is offering us.
Yeah. Perhaps the human has to become an element in the data chain with all the metadata associated and become a unit. I mean, today we don't have that type of control, but in our session we did talk about the layer of technology that enables both empathy and ethical use of data as becoming a missing layer to deliver these cross-channel experiences. But I agree with you that it's essential. Without that, this is a dream.
We talked about the sort of the centricity of data that does exist around me as a person, and what the most useful aspects of that might be. So, you know, for example, if I'm an experienced business wanting to create a better experience for you, Ethan, what can I know about you that you're comfortable sharing that would enable me to do that? So we came up with things like your calendar, right? These sort of like centerpieces where if I know your calendar, I can probably make some pretty deep assumptions about how I can interact with you, about reminders for going to buy groceries, about, you know, you name it, right? So it's calendar, it's, what else do we come up with? It's
the social graph.
The social graph.
The idea was like,
location.
you know, so much about location now. We have ability to geo-fence an experience with somebody. But what if you could time fence something around a particular calendar event? Because you know where you're going to be, who you're meeting with, the context of that meeting. So many aspects of that when you think about time. And especially the social graph laid on top of that. Who am I meeting with in the context for that information too?
Yeah, I think humans don't have a full feeling of security about knowing what that data will do. And so there might be advisory services that tell you, you know, like banks advise you whether you should invest here or invest there, that data becomes a key asset that you hold. And they might be advised to say, yes, it's okay to, you know, ring fence some of this data and hand it over, and somebody actually brokers that trust engagement with another brand. I think those types of services are required.
I could imagine that instead of every time I interact with another company, I need to decide whether or not I want to agree to their policies. Instead, I could travel through the world with my own data policy that the companies around me want to interact with me need to conform to.
Right.
That's actually a really interesting way to flip it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're thinking about that. We're talking about this.
And that could, you know, in that same policy container would be my electronic medical records and everything would be in there.
If you want to engage with me, here are my rules.
Yeah.
And if you do,
and if you want an exception, I may approve an exception, but this.
Frankly, here are my CPMs too.
Right.
That if you want access to me, you got to pay this centerpiece, this service that doesn't exist today, and those proceeds will either go to me or maybe to my favorite charity.
Something that came up a lot in our session of talking about, you know, like the next big case law is going to be around all this stuff, right? Like, what are the rules and regulations? And I feel like we talked a lot about how the internet has moved much more quickly than governing bodies have. You know, the governments haven't really caught up into that, and what is ethical? And we had a very healthy debate about that in our session of talking about some of these questions that really haven't been thought out. And just because you can do something from a technology perspective, should you do something? And are there ethics there that we haven't really explored yet as a community.
And we're going to come back to that really soon when you get to us on data. I want to talk about that policy too, because I think that's fascinating. Probably, maybe the best idea yet as consumers would be we actually create a policy for our privacy. Companies get access to that, and however we conform within, they can choose how they use our data. The challenge of all that is it doesn't benefit the marketers and the brands at all.
There have been companies who've tried to do it, and it's failed because it's actually the opposite. Consumers don't care enough.
Exactly.
Consumers, I mean, think about, how many T's and C's do we read?
None.
0, right? And so consumers don't care enough. So I forget the name of the company. There's 2 of them that started historically and failed to try to get consumers to come and put in their preferences and settings. You have a chicken and egg problem generally with that, right? Other marketers have to adopt it, et cetera. But consumers didn't come. Consumers didn't go and say, I care enough about monitoring, managing my own stuff in order to do that. Because at this point, I act as though all my stuff is in the open at this point.
It's because consumers don't see the value or the monetary value of the data that they have. So once they can ring fence the data, then they might be willing to value it and then allow people to access it for free or not for free. I mean, the game has to change.
They've never seen it though. They've never seen the value. They've always given it away.
Consumers don't care because they don't understand what they're giving up.
Yep.
And so it's not that they don't care, it's they aren't being asked the right question. So if you ask them, are you okay with me knowing your sexual preference to log into Facebook? You'd say, no, how is that relevant? But if it turned out that in fact the information that I was requiring from you gave me an 88% sort of confidence interval on whether or not you were straight, gay, or any one of the other options, you might reconsider. But we're not asking that question. We're saying, how about give me these few little things that just don't seem to add up to much? But the reality is that with today's technologies, those little bits of data add up to a huge amount of information. And I think we're heading into a collision that we need to manage, and that the companies need to step forward and manage proactively as opposed to responding to retroactively after something bad happens. More data leaks, et cetera. And we're beginning to understand the ramifications of the data policies that we're signing up to, and how our world is distorted by how we are understood by these companies, how we had only one view through our Facebook feed, and so on and so forth.
So I have a question from Stuart to this point. He talks about the intrusion of privacy right here around that, but there's also an opportunity to turn this potentially into an experience. He talks about how do you actually give that person the awareness and the control to use that personal data to have a better relationship? Is there an opportunity here to create a relationship, to create an experience based on the fact that you are going to safeguard that privacy, you are going to give that power back to that customer?
Yeah, I think that comes with transparency, right? People don't understand when you give data what happens to the data. I mean, if I could visualize how my data is getting triangulated with other data sets to other people, if I could see a picture of that and be able to consider what implications it has, I think that layer of understanding is missing. So it's almost like you throw it into a black hole and you give access, so people don't want to give access. So I think there is definitely a need to educate through transparency in a way that people understand, that will allow people to be on the other side of privacy, right? You can nudge them towards the right behaviors without having to have so many policy decisions being made on behalf of us by governments.
I think we're past the point of no return. I think it's up to companies, it's up to corporations, to businesses to build and then maintain trust with consumers that we're taking care of their data. I think that to put the onus on consumers is onerous, and to be perfectly frank, it's like not going to work. Like no consumer, the mass majority of consumers are not going to even with education put the emphasis there, and so I do think it's up to us to provide the trust and the safety net and the frameworks that consumers know they can believe in to protect them. And that sounds great until you look at the CIA getting hacked and they're like, well, what's safe anymore? But again, that is, I think, as it becomes more pervasive, that data is more susceptible than it ever has been, even in the highest realms of security. I think that consumers generally have to kind of just,
there's a difference between safety of data and then companies building trust, right? Companies build trust by meaningfully asking you for data and then meaningfully using it, right? Your example is a great one, right? If Facebook asked me, whatever it was, sexual preference based just to log in, I wouldn't see as a consumer the one-for-one match why they were asking. But if they asked for something very explicit and I got a very obvious response, I'm going to build trust with the company. Now, I hope they're being safe with my data that I'm giving them, but I've got to see that trust relationship pay off. As you think of an experienced business in the future, they have to build trust if they want to retain.
So it's the difference between I'm giving you this and the experience I expect in return is going to be valuable enough to warrant the ask.
That's exactly right.
Versus is my data secure, which is more in the next discussion. I guess that's fair.
So you have a data experience, right? And a data experience of I give you everything and you give me nothing in return is a bad experience for me, and it's not going to happen again, as long as I understand it. And I think people are going to understand it more and more as we go forward. And I think that's the equilibrium that's going to need to be struck. Corporations have had the opportunity to do this all along, and so I think relying on them to voluntarily just step forward and suddenly change their data policies and so on, I think we'll be waiting a while.
That's why in Europe it's regulated now. Right? Yeah. In Europe, if it's a year or something, it's mandatory that all businesses are more transparent and you can't share data without approval, right?
Yeah. I think the real provocative statement here, though, is that like voters, right? How many voters go out and vote but haven't educated themselves on what they're voting for? Privacy is a lot like that. Like people, when you ask them about it, they'll tell you what they want, but then they'll go download the app and they won't read the privacy policy and they won't read any of the privacy policies. And that's why I really agree with Jordan when he says we're past the point of no return. The layman does not want to understand privacy. They want someone to understand privacy for them. They want it to be dictated to them, and they want to operate within the confines. And that's why it works in Europe, is that they're being told how it works. It's this construct, and they live within this construct. And I think it's really, really important that we kind of accept that that's where we're at with it. Because I think if we try to rewrite the rules, we're going way backward. We essentially, privacy doesn't exist. And I'll actually go one step further from a provocation standpoint. Everything we put on the internet, we need to assume someone else sees. Everything. There is no privacy left on the internet.
Well, it's not even just on the internet. It's anywhere you go, who you meet with, what you say on the sidewalk.
Data.
If anything is public, the only thing that's truly private is what stays in your head.
We're in Las Vegas.
And even then, we can't really fool ourselves because we may be able to sense it. Just the sensors are becoming so powerful, you can tell if my palms are sweaty or not.
What happens here goes on the internet.
What are the ramifications of giving up on that?
Yeah.
I can't. I have a hard time believing what I'm hearing. The ramifications of giving up on owning our personal information are enormous.
Yep.
I don't disagree with the feeling, and as a group of people who live in this, our understanding of it. What I'm saying is the layman that goes to the poll and makes a vote based on a single issue, or makes a vote based upon something a friend told them, reflects greater society more than a room full of people who are highly educated and aware of what's going on inside of privacy and data policies. They don't read it, they don't care. All they want is to post pictures of their dogs and have their friends like it.
But we try to get people to go and vote because it's important to participate, and we try to educate them before they vote, and we don't give up on that.
Yeah.
And if we give up and we say, you know what, here's a data policy, sorry you didn't read it, but it's unreadable.
How hard are we really trying?
We're not trying hard at all.
No, I'm talking about with the voting. Not to change the topic, but I'm saying,
it depends,
is that an illusion or is that real?
We try harder.
Because do the politicians really want us educated?
I want to go back to what you were saying though, but if those policies are so unusable, are they really valid, and how do we actually change this? We're going to be an experience business, and data is going to be the foundation of what we do to deliver and design these experiences then how do we think about people's data? I mean, I know we're kind of phoning into area, but from a delivery standpoint, how do we
separate though? I mean, again, I go back to, I'm with you, right? My data's out there, I'm good with that. But I engage with companies that I believe I trust, and that trust my time, trust my data. And so at some level, those are the companies that I'm going to self-select. Those are the experiences that I'm going to self-select. So I'm just curious if you can separate the two, because I think you're right, most people have separated the two.
But our experience with companies now as consumers is so much more passive than it's ever been because of the app structure, right? Most of my interactions with other companies on a daily basis are not in the real world anymore, they're via apps.
Right.
And that app updates whenever the company wants to update it. And so, when Uber updates their app and I install it and millions of other people automatically update it without even approving it, and I open up the app the next time and it feels a little warning, I say okay, but then find out in the press a week later, that there's an article about how that new app update actually now tracks you automatically after you get out of the Uber for 5 minutes to where your destination is. That's, that's where the breakdown is. That's where it is on the companies, because nobody looked at that until it was a press thing. And then all of a sudden, oh, Uber done another bad thing, and we all look and say, that's terrible, that's really gross, you can't track me after I get out.
Then you call another Uber.
Yeah, then you call another Uber after
but that goes
they
back to
explain why, right?
But that's why transparency.
Yeah.
That's why I think even if most people don't actually want transparency or willing to look at it like voters, as you were talking about, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't provide transparency for those who want to know what's going on. And I think more and more as the world becomes a place where lots of cyber stuff is happening, and I think people would want to be informed. So I think there is an opportunity for, all the small print to become more readable by humans.
I'm hopeful. I want everybody to want to get educated on vote, and I want everybody to learn about privacy. I guess this is where you go back to the data, though. What do the trends actually say about people? So we're reflecting, creating an experience business based on what people really want, or what we idealistically think or hope that they want.
Well, the thing is, I too am hopeful, but I hear something actually, there's a little triangle here that is very interesting. You said something a while ago about how it's, let's say, using the Adobe example, it's Adobe's responsibility. And I also agree, you can't give up on this, right? And of course, it's very difficult. So no one's disputing any of that. But at least the first line of defense can be that companies start to progress that forward. And you know what I would love to see, going back to your group discussion, going from product to experience, why isn't terms of service a human readable thing?
Yeah,
that is
that's
the
what
most
I was thinking.
table stakes, this is very simple. And that's something where suddenly you can allow the ability for that education to happen. And that's something where that's a little bit of, that's a very poor experience, right? And that's why people don't engage. If instead I could read the Uber update in the same way that I can read the app update developer notes and say, hey, you know what, this sounds great. I'm actually looking forward to this change. Maybe I'm uncomfortable with it, maybe it's different, but you know what, I can see how this could be beneficial.
Something you asked earlier, that's an opportunity to create, or somebody from online asked, how do you create? I don't think it's a new tool. I think it's within the existing apps and services we're using and products we're using, there are opportunities. If Uber just came out and said, this is why we did it. This is the update on the legal side, and this is why. I've never seen that before.
The good news is it's not too late.
Yeah.
We're at the beginning. The fact that this group is having this conversation is the foundation of this becoming, hopefully, a better situation.
Should law schools teach design thinking? Question mark.
Absolutely.
We were talking before last night that design thinking doesn't stop with marketing and product. It goes to legal. It goes to the finance department. Because when every accountant, every lawyer is focused on that great experience for the customers, then things change.
When you hit I agree, that 2 seconds is an experience in your journey. And it's a bad one, and none of us pay attention to it, but you've just accepted
Huge
that.
opportunity,
That's an experience. How do you make it better? How do you inform the consumer what has been updated? How do you inform the consumer what value they are going to derive, to your point, Ethan, from accepting these terms? Not just blanketly accepting it.
All right.
Charlene is the research arm of this group, right? Maybe there's some research that needs to be done of how badly people really want that. Because like I said, I'm super hopeful, and Ethan, I want what you want. I want people to go get educated and learn, because I think we're giving up too much for what we're getting. But I think as marketers, it's really, really hard to say, let's make the process more cumbersome, complex, and slow down the adoption of the apps and products we're building while we stop to educate people. Or how do we create an experience that does that simultaneously?
For the companies who can do this will be the ones who really take it home, because they'll develop the kind of trust that will be irreplaceable, that other people will really have to climb that mountain even higher.
We're moving to intimacy, and trust is a part of that intimacy, and if I think that it can become one part of a portfolio of differentiation between company A and company B, where I will choose company B based in part on their privacy policies and how they handle communications around the sort of the fine print.
Go back to the metaphor that our group used about, it's about building relationships. If you were interacting with a real person and you didn't trust them, would you ever interact with them again? No. But as you grew to trust them more, you'd probably do more with them. And I think that's what businesses have to figure out.
Great. So we're going to close out the delivery. We've done design, delivery. Now we're going to move on to data. We've been talking about data as the foundation for so much of this. So the data team, why don't you kick us off
I
here
feel like this, it's interesting. I think this is really good setup for a lot of where we went. I think when we talk about do consumers care, well, I don't know. Do I really care if they're just because they're going to serve me an ad or they're going to serve me an experience? Maybe I don't really care. I mean, maybe I don't care what my age or income is, but when we start seeing data used with malintent, so we as marketers are collecting all of this data, and media companies, right, are collecting all of these data on consumers with benign intent, right? Our intent is to create better experiences for them, create more personalized experiences, surface them products and services that they actually want, surface them up in a way that they understand and they want to be communicated. Very benign intent. And I think where we kind of got to, and I'll unpack it, I'll say it and then I'll unpack it a little bit, is, our prediction is data will cause the next war. And that sounds really scary, but we're already starting to see malintent. We saw it with the Russians hacking Yahoo, whether, I guess the Senate is determining whether they interfered with the presidential election, but the prevailing, whichever side of the party you are on, the prevailing sentiment is there was some sort of interference. We're starting to see it used as, talking about cyber attacks and the CIA getting hacked and classified documents being put up that are putting people's lives at risk. And when we talk about WikiLeaks and who is really WikiLeaks and what's going on, and I think we're starting to see it at kind of a macro level, but at some point it could be hit you at a personal level where somehow you are personally damaged because maybe I don't care if Uber tracks everywhere I'm going, unless I happen to be going to the liquor store every day and they tell my boss that and I lose my job, which I'm not doing, but as an example. Or I'm not open about certain things at work or in my life, my public or my private life, that are now made public because apps are tracking me and listening to me and seeing where I'm going, and there can be malintent. And one of the things that we talked about as well, when you talk about trust, you go into the app store and you download an app, you have no idea where it came from, who was behind it. It could be two guys in a garage collecting all of your information. How do you know?
The way that we started down this path too, one of the first statements as we were speaking was that marketers we've created this kind of folklore that you just collect as much data as you can and don't worry about what it's for or what you do with it. Just collect it, because as long as you have it, we can figure it out later. And I think it started as a behavioral insight that we came up with, essentially saying, why are we collecting all this data? And you've brought that up too. We've collected so much of it. We're hoping that maybe this AI idea is going to somehow solve this issue. But unfortunately, it's created a bad behavior that can set up some of these negative consequences.
Absolutely.
So we came up with the declarative statements, and we had a few of them. But she mentioned the one that obviously we think the next war will actually be rooted in big data. And you've heard the phrase, data is the new oil. So it kind of made sense. We had a couple of others that I think are somewhat provocative, though. We think that the number one practice in law that will be developed in the next 5 years will be in the field of artificial intelligence and litigation around what artificial intelligence is going to do. And the third that we did is we think data will actually drive an increase in life expectancy. And by 2030, we think that life expectancy will rise by at least 5 years due to the way we will be able to utilize data to basically improve the delivery of healthcare. And we've said they're going to almost need to deregulate so that we can get all this data and then re-regulate because of what's going on with HIPAA. But as a whole, we're looking at some data layers and some connections in terms of the world. So we went super provocative. I mean, the long and short is we knew some of the things like there's too much data, not everybody's using enough data, things like that. But what we were really looking for in the spirit of this think tank and bringing this thing home was some really, really strong provocative statements like, could data create a war?
So what's interesting is these two, it's kind of at odds. In order to get value out of data, we need to centralize it and be able to access it in a way that we can compare all the data sets to each other to make better decisions, to drive better designed experiences. But to centralize all of that data also puts the entire set of data around me at risk. Right now, it's decentralized. So, if some piece of data gets out that I don't want, that's a fairly scoped, thing. But if all of my data is centralized in one place, it runs the risk. And if everybody's data was also centralized in that same place, that's where the risk of it truly being able to, data being used for evil versus good, which is, the marketer's side. We all want it in product businesses. We want to use it for good, to create great experiences. But to do it means centralization. To centralize means risk. I think it's interesting.
That's not even that. I mean, we went down a slightly different path too. We didn't touch on this because I think it's a little spooky maybe for this conversation, but in a way, we've all talked about this notion of singularity and the idea that, that somehow Terminator is going to come true, right? But if you really think about it, we've inadvertently put many of those pieces already in place. And every time we make a decision, we may be kind of pushing ourselves into that or backing ourselves into a corner in a way that we can't kind of undo. So it's not even about centralizing data, because I think everybody can, on the surface, understand that those linkages are dangerous. And in a way, the fact that this is a commercial enterprise that controls a lot of this data, that protection element allows it to be a little bit more secure, which might be counterintuitive. But at the same time, social media has created an incredible training set of data for machine learning. Uber has provided Uber, Lyft, ride sharing, where you go per day, how long you spend there, who you're with. There is so much data that that is just one step away, breath away from creating a very kind of unbelievably accurate depiction of who you are. So maybe let's just say you don't think so much of a ride-sharing service getting, hacked. But then what if someone knows that these times of the day I'm not there? That is the prime time to come and rob me. Or, there's so many ways that we're not even thinking about the implication of that collection of data.
Because so much of that we give away anyway. And that was kind of how we started as the data group, and then we kept going down this AI path because we think so much of the problems with trying to solve this experience business is growth of human potential versus growth of data, and there's this gap, and we know that AI is going to fill this gap between human potential, and we constantly volunteer that information. We used to think of things like, when am I going to be away from my home on vacation? Like, I'm not going to tell because I don't want to get robbed. Now we post it publicly on our Facebook page so the whole world knows when we're going away, and we're sending pictures from Hawaii like, yeah, I'm not at my house, come rob me. And I mean, we've volunteered it, and now the machines though, for both good and for bad, are going to be able to access that data, collect it, look at all the taggings, be able to make quick assertions of what's going on in the world.
So, but there are, there are a lot of really positive things that data can do.
Yeah, we
were talking about those too.
Right now, I'd like to flip this over.
We're watching Westworld.
I think some of this might seem like it's not a parallel to what we've been discussing. I just think we particularly believe this comes down to businesses making these decisions, and they are not just throwaway decisions. That's part of experience design. What is the implication of the way that I store my data, I collect my data? What are the data points? Why am I doing this? How am I expressing this to our customers? And how can I show them that in the future that is the right decision, that they should, goes back to trust. This thread is there, but I think as part of being able to make a better decision around experience design, you have to think about the negative consequence too, or else you'll just kind of look at it through that one lens and then omit so much other information.
Right. We talked about in our design section about, it's not just about the experience that designers have responsibility, it's also for the collection of data, how to collect it ethically, and also the unintended consequences of what might happen to that collection. So design extends beyond just what you show consumers, but taking responsibility for what might happen with the data that you're so easily enabling for the collection of.
And
right?
Jordan, I can see how it sounds like we went, we were definitely like trying to think when we wanted to come up with a really good declarative statement that maybe that was a little bit more provocative than anything else in the space. But as a whole, one of the other areas we did talk a lot about was the bias of data. And kind of what you said just reflects a little bit of the bias of data, and that's we tend to skew it to tell us the story we want to hear. Teresa was telling me about countless times where management come to her and say, hey, I need to query the analytics, I need to query the data to determine if this is correct. This thing that I already believe, I need some data to back it up. And I think that's part of it is we want to believe, because as marketers, we are trying to create great experiences, and we're telling everybody about the great experiences we're creating. But there are consequences of positive and negative to all the things that we do. And I think as brands, part of the reason we thought about this litigation and AI and data and everything like that is companies didn't intend to become data companies. But every company on the planet is now a data company. You have data, and you are at risk if you are collecting data, storing data, and somehow that data gets breached. Whether you're the bakery that makes the really good croissants or you're Verizon, you have to protect that. And when you don't, you're at risk. So we kind of went dark, but I think as a whole, we also were really looking at what are some connections that are super provocative and the implications that data has, as we all kind of know some of the surface things that are going on with masses of data.
And that's where we're going back to the ethics of it, right? So, you know, with the situation with Apple being asked to create a code to crack the phone open. So it's not that it's bad or good. It's just that as a group of individuals, we felt that these are conversations and ethics, the ethics around it and the legalities around it. We talked about, you know, who's at risk if a self-driving car hits someone. And that's where we thought with the rise in case law and almost a whole field of law around artificial intelligence and some of these things is probably going to be a rise we'll see in the next couple of years.
The insurance industry is getting disrupted because of that, right? So who's going to actually insure the car? I mean, is it going to be the product or is it, you know?
Well, okay, so and in a way, this is also related. And again, these seem disparate, but they're not. They're all part of the same conversation. We also discussed that, you know, I think we've all heard this quote that there's more data collected or data, you know, kind of created per day than has existed in the history of humanity, right? And in a way, if that's per day, not that long from now, that will be per minute, per second. This is only going to increase. And I love that exponential, the differential between what humans are capable of understanding and what an AI could theoretically help to parse. So if you, but there's more to it than that. Right now, the way that we are interpreting this massive over-collection of data with no seeming end in sight is that we've created this field called data science, which is the most, you know, kind of popular and high-paying job description. And marketers love to work with data scientists because it helps them make data-driven marketing decisions. So this is already starting to converge. But what we think is that that's going to evolve. That's only step one. And actually, the data artist is going to be the next really big pioneering field. And in a way, that's also linked to, you know, I think where the design team was thinking, because that's
more like on the data utilization side, like how I look at the data and not analyze it, but how I look at the data and make new decisions or create new things out of it.
Well, they say that you need three things for data to actually have value. One is you need the data science talent. Second is you need the domain knowledge to understand what the data is about. And the third thing is you need to ask the right questions, which is really the empathetic questions you want to ask from a design perspective.
That's it, and that really, when
and then a fourth one, how are you going to use that?
Yeah, to drive data experiences.
Yeah, and I love data artists, love it.
And the fifth is probably,
We call
can
it
you
data
eliminate
designer.
the human bias in all the data we create? Because I still believe in so many surveys, you know, and being a researcher, you structure a question oftentimes with something you want the answer to be. And even though it can be completely a subconscious thing you do, just the place you put a question in your query or in a survey can indicate the response is different, whether it's in the beginning or the end, whether it's yes and no, or it's 1 to 10. And so many of us, like I said, cannot eliminate that bias in our mind. So we create the survey, we create the data set, the queries, the questions with something we want to have happen. And until we stop doing that, we'll never get as much value out of the data as we could.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I also believe it exists. People don't realize it exists on the receiving end of that too. There are biases that exist. There's white coat syndrome. If you're asked, do you like the movie I made? Of course you're going to say, I loved it. And now I'm operating from a flawed data set. So not only are we potentially asking the wrong questions, we're receiving flawed data back. I mean, I will say it slightly, you know, a little bit self-serving. I think emotion data can start to resolve some of those issues because the body doesn't lie. If I'm having a positive experience, there will be a physiological reaction. If I'm unhappy, there will be micro-expressions that change and I can somehow furrow my brow or frown. And the idea of businesses being able to use that to fuel their experience data models is very exciting, because it eliminates that that kind of flawed data set that we've basically been forced to use because there wasn't another alternative yet.
And this is a really important part of design today, is we incorporate where and how to instrument the experience and insert sensors effectively, whether they're code or actual, if we're talking about environment, such that we're getting the real data based on, the empirical data based on behaviors, not based on opinions, or getting both and understanding and parsing the relationship between the two. I want to add in one sort of corollary to all of what you were just saying, because one route that we went down that Nan touched on, and I wanted to sort of emphasize, was we really landed in a place of understanding that design needs a new code of ethics to bring it in alignment or to acknowledge sort of where we're at today with technology and the trajectory that we're on for tomorrow. Because if I walk that all the way out to its most provocative state, I think that design, and this is, I think some of the things that we've said may be self-aggrandizing around design, and forgive us, but I think that design can either save us or destroy us. I really feel like there's a major role to, there will be other actors, but it has a major role to play on where we land. And I think that right now we don't really have ways of understanding how we're performing.
Well, I think this goes back to the top-down conversation we were having earlier of what comes from the C-suite, from the CEO. Who is the CEO? What is the profile of that person? You know, look at Satya Nadella in Microsoft. Takes over and is just flipping that company around into being a very customer-centric, design-focused, experience-focused business, and doing it way faster than I think anybody thought was even possible for a company like Microsoft. And he's not doing it by going in and asking for data that proves something. He's not asking for measurement on big data sets that prove that something is either working or it's not at Microsoft. He's going based on the intuition that there is a vision bigger than the measurement, and not looking for validation in the measurement. And you know, and so that's it kind of full circle. The experience business, one of our sub provocative statements that we didn't get to, I'll say it now, is that the CEO in the future, very near future, CEOs will start to get hired and fired based on their ability to deliver an experience business, based on their ability to be data artists, not data analysts, based on their ability to look at a comprehensive experience across organizations and across business units, not just as P&Ls of individual operations. Yeah, and so I think, and there's some other subs of that, but I think it's...
Does it go back to the future CEO, the future experience creation looks a little bit more like, you know, when Henry Ford said, if I asked the people what they wanted, basically the data, they would have asked for faster horses. They would have, you know, Steve Jobs always believed he knew better what the market wanted than what the data. He didn't use the data at all. So we talk about data-driven, then we don't. Reed Hastings created Netflix, and everything Netflix has evolved into based upon an experience that he had, that he just didn't like the late fees when he went and rented movies. And he built an entire enterprise. He built a huge business around something that simple. And what I'm almost hearing here is data can't fix everything. And there is still a place for human. There is still a place.
The data said that the streaming model was totally upside down and was never going to work.
Exactly, but I'm saying it in his intuition. So even myself, someone who's a huge proponent of data and data-driven leadership, you can say there still is a place, and maybe in experience and design is one of the richest places for this to live, for the human, empathetic leadership of someone to simply say what the data cannot tell them.
Yeah, well, data, I mean, we know that humans are not rational decision makers, right? I mean, we are, you know, there's system one thinking and there's system two thinking. And a lot of, you know, the intuitive decision making is full of bias. And we have to take into account that bias in decision making. Like you said, when Reed Hastings or Steve Jobs ignored the data and, you know, took that intuitive leap into what makes sense. So I think data without the human cannot really make sort of the creative decisions that happen. But ultimately, I think what you were talking about is data enables things that we would not imagine otherwise. So we were talking a bit about the digital divide that has been created with data. And so one responsibility that and effect that data can have is in countries where, you know, you didn't know when the rains were going to fall and when you know, crops would grow. You know, data has a tremendous ability to actually enable development, economic development, and I think that's the other side of cyber war, right? So there is cyber war, and we'd be fearful of that. But the positive effect is that data, if designed properly, could enable the world to be a better place.
That's around, you know, these very serious human elements. But I think that same analogy could be made around this idea of this visionary leader, you know, just saying, I don't care about the data, I know this is right, I feel it, but being able to use experience data to defend a creative risk. So I don't think we're trying to say that the data is going to tell you, you know, oh, this is how you can solve all of your business's woes, because I think that's not realistic, and that's the data artist thing, I think, comes from that, right? Yeah. But at the same time, we need to be able to measure efficacy, and especially if those are emotional decisions. So that's something that's very on the near horizon, because if you look at that, the way that we know that Netflix is okay, even though they didn't listen to the data, is I mean, who watches Netflix? Every single one of us, right? So
but Netflix uses
that's
data
important
and they
to
use the
create
data. That's exactly. Netflix is
Yeah, they do.
a big data company. They use data to help influence show programming.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the
business
irony of the
model.
whole thing.
It
Is
is
I said
the
that it's when Reed Hastings went to create a streaming service, move away from the physical model, all the data and all the analysts, market
Didn't have the
analysts
right
said,
data.
he's crazy, this is never going to work, right? And the irony in that is now, yes, their new shows are totally data-driven in terms of delivering sort of creative input.
But that's going to evolve even further because we're still only at the beginning. If you think about that new modality, this is still genre-based recommendations. And there's no reason why that couldn't start to move towards emotional-based recommendations, right? So I like films that have this emotional arc. So I don't want to know this is a romantic comedy or, this is a drama. I want to know that it's going to make me feel like this because that's the mood that I'm in. So that seems to be the next kind of step, is these emotional recommendations. That's also part of experience.
I think we're very much in the first order sort of understanding of how to create a positive experience based on data. And if we're looking for data, and we all talked about this throughout the day, if we're looking at data and we're looking for a response that is, I'm smiling, I'm smiling, I'm smiling, I'm smiling, I'm smiling, that's 7 smiles or however many that was, that's a very high score, and I'm smiling, I'm unhappy, I'm unhappy, I'm happy, I'm smiling, that's a bad experience. That may be exactly wrong because there's a dynamic range to the human experience in that second case that could be much more compelling for the end user or the consumer, whoever that is, than the first case, which is just going to be bland. That's just not how we live our lives, and we needed that emotional arc. And I think that there's a danger that we look at the data for constant likes and thumbs ups and don't understand that actually that variety and that emotional arc and the challenge and the disruption that is sometimes inserted into our lives is actually a really important part of what nets out at a very positive result in the end.
Let me add to that, and I want to go back to you to answer this. Laura from Facebook asks, can emotions really be relied on? Are they reliable even?
I would love to spend all of my life working on that, because that is just one of the most fascinating things. We are irrational actors, right? But at the same time, we're very predictable. So Darwin was measuring emotion, right? I mean, this is not something that came up yesterday. People have wondered about emotion and the function of the brain and how we make these kind of decisions. And all this has a lot of data behind it. I think what's fascinating about that, and can emotions be trusted, it stems from the fact that the way that we've examined it historically has been in a lab, which is naturally an unnatural environment. But if you can suddenly start to bring that into everyday life and get authentic data, and more importantly, not look at these small numbers. The sample size in the lab is in the tens maybe, right? It's a very, very low number. If something that's thousands, if not millions, if not billions of people, that's when you can start to really gain some insights that are going to be useful. And one thing, Ethan, that I thought about when you just said that I really agree with, even companies like Facebook are understanding the emotional dynamic is very important by moving away from just this, single-minded like, which tells you nothing, to emojis. Seems so simple, but yet that provides so much more value as far as what you're learning. I think businesses, anybody who's kind of thinking about it in that sense, is going to gain a lot more from that notion because we aren't able to communicate our experiences.
And if you take an emotion-centric approach, it's like Ethan said earlier in our earlier discussion that while designing an experience, you should think about where to. I was talking about how seamless it should be. Ethan, you were like, there should be some friction in some places, because some people might want a challenge, right? Some people, when you provide something to them that makes them think a little bit, they get excited. The next person may say, ugh, that's too much work, or frustration. And understanding the person's emotional profile and presenting an experience that may input friction or challenge or things along the way to make the sweet sweeter may be good for a whole set of people where it's not for others. And that's that emotional base profile that we don't really have today that you guys are
You know who does this really well? I think Nike has done an exceptional job of recognizing exactly what you've both just said, which is this idea of limited release. And that actually, it's not about saying every single person's going to have this pair of Jordans. No, there's 50 of them. And you got to fight really hard to get one. And if you get it, now you're having this new type of experience. And it goes back to this desire for personalization and to be able to have that. So I think that there are many ways to go about doing that. And I'd say more importantly, that's not a technology-driven approach at all. That's an insight from probably some brilliant designer who said, I think I know how to create a better experience, and it doesn't even involve anything complicated. So there's a lot of ways you can achieve that same goal.
So we are fast approaching the end of this wonderful discussion. I wish we could go on for hours because we have so much material. But I'd like to get some key takeaways from you all. Very fast key takeaways about how do you think about what it means and how do you create an experience business? Anybody want to start?
I think data is here to stay. We all know that. But I think we really need to make sure we design with data, not just the experiences or the value for the company, but design the side effects of using that data. I think that becomes a responsibility for organizations. I mean, it's inevitable, right? And
I think if you stay focused on your consumer, what does your consumer want, and how do you do right by them, and everything that you do, I think you're going to win. And absolutely, the data is here to help you, I think, more than ever, make those right decisions for our customers.
I think I took away the fact that, other than war, is stuck in my head now, but I think I took away something I've always believed. Companies that value trust with their consumers will succeed, and so if you want to be an experience company, trust is probably even more critical than ever.
I think it's important that we just remind ourselves over and over, technology is not the way to lead an experience business. It needs to be passive in the eye of the user, unless, of course, technology is the product. And I think more and more we, as marketers, think about technology and how it can help, but we need to less and less think about telling the consumer, because it doesn't change, they don't care, they just want that experience.
What we've all done in our careers was a combination of art and science. I think it's flipped with all the technology that's enabling us. It's now science and art. And I think it's very important for people not to forget that art part. I love your comment, Rana. It's science and art.
I'd say that now it's more critical than ever for us to over-index on empathy and ethics in design. I think both are critical to the success of our businesses, of our individual well-being, and our future collectively as a society.
And I'll say it's, to me, the biggest takeaway is that it's organizational. It starts top down. It starts with a strategy that's driven from the top that permeates the organization. And we've talked about a bunch of examples of companies who've delivered on that really well. And never using technology as an excuse to replace experience. We didn't really get to talk about this a lot, but there's so many experiences that the technology, we kind of did talk about it, the technology takes the forefront and it makes the experience more complex. So think about the experience first, and if a human can solve that experience better than the technology, then use the human.
I learned that experience is every single person's responsibility within the organization. Whether or not that seems to be, what you're responsible for, it needs to be, because that's essentially how we can change. But the other element of that is that it's not too late, and that if we are sensing that maybe the decisions we're making as marketers or as technologists or as humans is not really going in a way that we think will be successful in the long run, that we can make decisions to change that today.
And I'll say the last word is, my learning and takeaway from this is that this is a really hard problem, and that this is not going to be solved by some magic bullet of technology or some magical charismatic leader or some process that a consulting team or an agency can bring. This is going to take multi-levels, many years, and a tremendous amount of patience and careful listening to who your customers are. In the end, if you keep those customers close by and develop that trust, you'll be in a good place. So we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank the people who are kind of to join us for the past hour and a half online. We are going to continue this discussion here at Adobe Summit here in Las Vegas, and we encourage you to follow along on all of Adobe's many different social channels, and again, continue this conversation with the hashtag AdobeTT. Thank you very much to all of you for participating in this past day, and thank you again very much for joining us. Have a great day.